Hello everyone and welcome. Yes, my name is Arrowfire and welcome back to another tier ranking video. Done one of these before when I ranked and reviewed every Transformers cartoon or TV series that we have had. I've had that video up on my channel and a few of you seem to like it. So today I am going to do one for every Transformers video game that has come out under the Transformers banner. So I have picked this list up from Tiermaker. It's a pre-made list. Full credit to the person who created it, which was BlueGeezeS2234. There's your Twitter handle for you. So, for those who are familiar with this, it's a pre-assembled list, and a lot of the images that are on screen here are pre-made, and some of them are duplicated. I'm not really sure why. I can't actually remove them, but I've added on some of the later ones as well. This only went up to a point. Now, I have not included things where it's a license agreement, so I haven't included Angry Birds and Transformers, or was it the Warships one where you can get some Transformer skins, or Fortnite, anything where a likeness is used in accordance with Hasbro extending the license. This is a dedicated Transformers game. So I have done my best with the help of Wikipedia and my own knowledge of putting these in chronological order, and I'm sure I have missed out someone's favourite game. I'm sure people are going to be screaming through the screens going, how could you miss this? How could you miss that? I have done it as best as I can, and for the ones that I feel are kind of most noteworthy, that more often than not people are going to remember. So let's get started, shall we? As you can see with the rankings on the side, I've gone for triple S tier, S tier, A, B, C, full of pit, which means it wasn't very good at all, and haven't played it. That was a pre-existing category, and I thought there's going to be a few on here that I actually haven't played. So where do I start? Well, let's start with the very first game, the Transformers game, released in 1986 on the Commodore 64, which really was an Ultra Magnus driving around on screen. There wasn't much else to say about it. It was very basic. Such were the games at the time. It looked more like a Donkey Kong kind of game. There wasn't much to do in terms of Transformers other than Ultra Magnus just jumping about. It was the license and the fact that it was under the Transformers banner that kind of made it the first Transformers game, and therefore noteworthy to people of the time. But shock horror, I haven't played this one. I've only seen it. I never actually owned a Commodore 64. I'm not that old, so I'm going to put this down under the haven't played it category, and that's just going to be where it stays. And then we move on to Beast Wars and the PlayStation 1. It's that big time from the craze of Transformers. I've said this before, how Beast Wars reinvigorated and rejuvenated Transformers, because you go from 1986 to what, 98, 99, 1999 to get a game out, 97, 98, 99. Technology improved, and we went through the 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit consoles, and we started going into discs, so there was more technology available, and that was with the PlayStation 1 Beast Wars game. I did have this game. I was a big fan of this game. There are plus and minuses points for this. Now, plus point is that you could play as the Maximals and the Predacons, and I was big into Beast Wars, so this was great to be able to play as the characters. You could transform, you could be Dinobot and shoot a laser, I think, from his sword, which didn't make any sense. They were a bit generic with some of the approaches to the characters, but you could go into beast mode, much like the show. You came near raw energon, you had to go into beast wars had to go beast mode to stay alive. The problem with that was once you became your alt mode, your beast form, you couldn't do anything other than run, and that was a big letdown for the game. You couldn't even attack, you couldn't bite, you couldn't shoot anything, and you just kind of did it to survive, which, whilst it kept the premise of the show, felt like a bit of a miss to me. But it was one of the few games that you could play as either the Maximals or the Predacons, the good guys or the bad guys. The level design was a bit iffy. Some of the boss fights were okay. I think I only ever completed it with the Maximals, and I remember beating Inferno and Megatron, and some of the level designs actually fighting on the dark side was a very cool end level to choose. It has a resonating place with me because I'm a big Beast Wars fan, but a stellar game, award-winning game it was not. But it was one of the few games that you could play on both sides, and it kept honourable to the show in that you could play as the characters of the show. there was a nice little backstory to it. There was clips from the actual show in there and a nice voiceover as well of Sentinel, the base of the Axelon. So I'm going to put that under, I'll go A tier, but I'm biased. I think that was a generous A tier. Okay, next we'll go on to Beast Wars Transmetals. This came out on the Nintendo 64 and I was aching for this game. It was great. It was using these characters, these cool looking characters. The Nintendo had a bit more power than the PlayStation, arguably, and it was a chance to play as the shiny new characters. You could play as Silverbolt, you can play as Quickstrike, you play as Tarantulas in these form in a one-on-one arena deathmatch, and you were fighting in the settings of the Predacon base and things like that. And I was so eager for it not to be released to Western audiences, at least not in the UK. And I've tried so much to get my hands on it, but I think I had to get a Japanese working Nintendo 64 maybe just to get this game, and I haven't been able to source a copy to play it. But it looked really cool. I'm going to have to put it in haven't played because I haven't. But I was really upset, again, being a big Beast Wars fan and a fan of the Transmetals, that I really wanted my hands on this game. But that again led to a dormant stage, and we go on to 2003 with the PlayStation 2 with Transformers Armada. And again, Beast Wars, whilst it rejuvenated Transformers, it did again do its life, and Transformers was going into a slump again, and the Unicron trilogy did give it a bit of a lifeline before the live action movies. 2003 Transformers, simply called Transformers, based on the Armada series, and the Armada series as a whole, was really quite good, and I think this resonates with a lot of fans as to how good a game it was for some very good moments. Now, it had 3 characters you could choose from, and that's quite limiting in and of itself, for Optimus, Hotshot and Red Alert to go up against the Decepticons, but it was kind of it. There wasn't, you couldn't play as the Decepticons, and I remember the person who sold the game to me even said, it's a shame you can't play as the Decepticons. And it was, because you came up against some very interesting opponents. I remember the first battle with Starscream. Who could forget the infamous battle with Tidal Wave, which is iconic to this day. And I actually never got past Megatron as a final boss. I thought Megatron was the final boss on this game until I watched Thew play it on his Playgrind channel, and he not only got past Megatron, you actually go and fight Unicron, and I had no idea up until fairly recently that was a thing. The game itself was good. It was very much based around the mini-cons, but it was a good combination of level traversing, bit of open world in as much as you could drive around, you could turn into your alt mode, and you could use the mini-cons, but it made you go back to levels when you unlocked further mini-cons. I remember there was the gliding one, and you had to get to a certain point, but you didn't unlock the gliding mini-con until many levels further on, which made you go back to the first level. Games like that are like, its biggest down point was the fact you couldn't play as a Decepticons, but it produced very good iconic moments. It was something quite daring. I don't think Armada had the pull necessarily to warrant a video game. I wouldn't say it was like the Second Coming with Transformers, the live action movies, or even Beast Wars to a point. I don't know if Armada had that kind of draw in that felt the need to install a game along with it at that part of the franchise, but they did it, and it did quite well. So for that, I'm going to put that under S tier. It's very good, and it's still beloved to this day. Now, we've got some duplicates here. Again, the list was pre-populated with this, but we're going into the 2007 Transformers movie, Transformers: A Game. I remember it being okay, fine. There was a multiplayer. Do I remember that? I'm trying to remember the game I played, but I remember there being kind of an open world element to it, or like a death arena, and you could pick some of the characters. I'm sure I played it. Well, PlayStation 2, there can't have been an online. I don't think I had an online on it. I think I struggled with online until it came to the 360, so maybe I'm getting my live action titles confused. But I do remember playing the 2007 game, but I had the same view towards the live action games as I do to the films. Like, they're fine to a point. It was never fully my thing. I was never fully invested. The games were capitalizing on it, but it was just a way of putting it on screen, and you weren't necessarily repeating the plots of the films in these games. You were kind of going off on similar tangents but runabout missions. The 2007 game was much like the 2007 film. It was fine, but it was there to promote in a money-making spin rather than anything else. For that, I'm going to put that under B. I remember playing it on the Nintendo DS at the time, and I remember being surprised how watered down it was as well, coming from a console to DS, and the DS is a good console, but I remember being things you couldn't do on it. Now, annoyingly, I've just shut down this window and it's lost all of my settings now. Okay, I think we're back there. I closed my window and it lost everything by mistake, and then I had to re-upload the file and then try and get them back in chronological order. So, I think I'm there. We then go on to a particular nice time for Transformers fans, and we're starting the War for Cybertron series. Now, this was different. This was fresh, and better yet, this was born out of something of just sheer fandom. It wasn't to sell anything per se. It wasn't to launch a new film. It wasn't necessarily to launch a new comic book, and it became known as the aligned continuity in and of itself, but it wasn't a driving sales pitch necessarily. This was an early Cybertron game, an early Cybertron look for Transformers, which was only half explored up to this point. Life before they got to Earth and what their alt modes would look like. That was as much part of these two games, and it's a shame it was only two. But starting off with the War for Cybertron games themselves, they were really good games, even if they had limitations. I remember the designs, particularly on Optimus in War for Cybertron, looking very clunky and very chubby almost, but I did like the fact that he had a different alt mode and what his Cybertronian alt mode would look like. I like the fact that the Decepticons were looking more like an underground organisation doing hit and run tactics. The level designs were actually really interesting and really good. Some of the boss designs were really good, and again, you could play as the Decepticons first if you chose to, and then the Autobots to finish out a linear story. It ended the first game playing as the Autobots. Well, first of all, playing as the Decepticons, you fought Omega Supreme, but then as it continued into the Autobot campaign, you fought Trypticon, and a nice little squash ending that I remember was a trophy or an achievement on the Xbox as well. If you got squashed by Trypticon as he came back out of a pit, that you got a trophy for that or an achievement for that. I never did. They're games that really do hold a lot of love in the fandom. There's not much to say, they weren't bad games. They had a lot to love about them. I'm trying to remember if War for Cybertron had an online or if it was just the full for Cybertron game. I have it in my head both did. I'm not sure. Nevertheless, they're some of the best games. They're timeless in the fact that they're not born out of anything. For that, I'm going to put them straight into the Triple S tier. I've got here that it's down for DS. I don't remember playing it on a DS. I think it was only the Xbox 360. I don't think I played it on PlayStation 3 or anything else. But yeah, it was a great game and a great time to be a Transformers gamer at that point. Back onto the movies with Dark of the Moon. Yep, you guessed it. I didn't play this one either. I just kind of felt they were much the same as each other. And again, they seemed to be aiming towards the Nintendos, the 3DSs at this point, which made me think they weren't really selling these games much for the larger consoles, the AAA gamings, the ones to have the big processing speed to tackle it. So yeah, they're fine, but they are there to sell movies and sell tickets to the movies, and it feels a little bit heartless when it's being pushed like that. Unlike what we have just experienced, if I've got my chronological times right, if you've just had a game that's just been born out of a fandom with its own stories, introducing the likes of Zeta Prime as a brand new character at that point, I believe, certainly one of the first times we saw him, and then you're going straight into, oh, let's plug this for the film. It just feels a bit lifeless by contrast. But then we come on to Fall of Cybertron. Arguably the best Transformers game ever made. They learnt from War for Cybertron and upgraded what they needed. The story was much the same. You had 5 chapters of Decepticons, 5 chapters of Autobots, but my god, what the upgrades you had. I remember the online mode for this one. I remember the level designs being quite cool. but some of the memorable moments you had the likes of Optimus Prime raising the dormant Titan of Metroplex, and really that kind of led into Titan's Return and the Combiner Wars trilogy that we know from there. But it was the rising of a Titan, and you had the line of Metroplex saying, "Metroplex heeds the call of the last Prime," and that was a very iconic moment. But you could also play as Grimlock. I remember in a great bloodthirsty battle, but possibly the best use of a combiner, playing as Bruticus attacking Autobot defenses, and an utter annihilation you could cause with the Decepticon Warlord. So much fun. A game I'm trying very hard to try and play again if I can get it on any kind of working computer. Straight away, it's up in the Triple S tier. It did what the original game did and more, and again it was fresh, it was new, it was crying out for a trilogy that we never got the end of. And what would they have done? Leave a note in the comments and let me know what you think. What would they have done with the third rounding on this title? Return to Cybertron? Revenge for Cybertron? I don't know. It was kind of the last great potential of that series. It was a different studio trying something, born out for the fans. That was good times. That was really good times. And this is where it kind of culminated now. It's testing my eyesight. I think this is Rise of the Dark Spark, isn't it? And this is where, if I'm right, they used the developer from the War for Cybertron and Fall for Cybertron title to kind of work on this one. It was supposed to be an amalgamation of the two titles, and it just killed it, stone dead. I remember looking at it thinking, that's not the game I wanted. I am not going to buy it. I'm not going to play it. So guess where that's going? Yep, you guessed it, bottom of the pile. It just felt like a waste of potential. And maybe that's the likes of Hasbro just seeing dollar signs rather than seeing a successful lineage. And that was kind of it for console gaming for a long time. I think the sales on that last title were very, very poor, to the point that even coming out on Nintendo, the games kind of stopped and dried up. And dormant periods in Transformer video games is expected, is known. We can go long years. Within a 40-year history, we've got more TV shows and more comics than we ever have video games. It's never been high on Hasbro's agenda. And so we go into Earth Wars, we go into mobile gaming, which I was tempted not to include, but it was very popular. Again, it was something a bit different. Earth Wars had a place, it had a time, it scratched an itch for a real-time, almost Command and Conquer strategy games, but it falls into the trap of a lot of modern-day tablet gaming or mobile gaming, where rather than playing a game and being done with it, you had time, you had to upgrade your base and your defenses and unlock characters, but it would take actual hours, days, weeks. And for me, I start to switch off around that kind of point. I can't feel too invested if I've got to wait for something to happen and it take 2 Earth weeks for it to happen. It could lose my attention span somewhat. I did play it, I did get into it. I actually tried to recently go back to it and I played it for a bit, but again, these long times, and of course the deeper into the game you go, the 5 minute, 6 minute, 7 minute waiting times become 7 days, and I lose track of what I'm waiting for and I completely forget about it. For that, it's going under C. Popular, still played today, but yeah, it has its place, but its place is a limited one. Arguably now the best Transformers game ever made, Devastation. Again, it wasn't independent, I suppose. It was very much a G1's game. It was paying a lot of fan service because you had Peter Cullen, you had Greg Berger, you had Frank Welker, you had these voices back. They had the cell shading, a very good battle early on with Devastator. It did really good of going around levels, transforming as well, driving around as you see fit, in very much a not quite 1984, but it wanted to go down that kind of setting. But you went deeper into the missions as well, you had some good boss fights, and you could be introduced to other characters. I remember fighting Devastator and Menasor later on, or fighting Motormaster one-on-one. These were good little battles, taking on the Constructicons independently. But I guess with these kind of games, you always kind of feel you're fighting foot soldiers, and that feels a bit Dynasty Warriors, very just hitting back hordes and waves of enemies that you don't care about. And having into fighting could kind of be a bit better. It can mean a bit more, but if you're just fighting Decepticon Grunt number 1 versus Decepticon Grunt number 99, once you've hit one, you've hit them all. I also felt the level design was a little restrictive. It didn't mean much to transform either, and it actually didn't mean much to play as the other characters. Grimlock was fun, but really I completed the game maybe 2-3 times. I didn't feel the need to play as the other characters. It didn't give that big a buzz. And as good as it was, you couldn't play as the Decepticons again. And I would have loved that. I would have loved to have played as Soundwave. I would have loved to have played as Devastator, could you imagine? Or Megatron. Good game. Did scratch an itch, I should say. But yeah, I'm going to put it under S tier. It was good. It was very much a fanboy's game, let's be honest. And yeah, it was fine. It was good. And it's crying out for a sequel. Cliffhanger ending going into Combiner Wars, and Nova Prime awakening from a slumber that again didn't come. Why do we bother? Battlegrounds was next. I got this, I played this, I liked it, and I was done with it. And I think that's where we are now with some of these games, and you look at the ones that are left, that's kind of the mood. Like, Hasbro are willing to play these games but are not willing to put in a 30, 40, 50 hour mega game. They certainly haven't got an RPG element anymore. These are like 10, 15 hour games to complete and play and be done and never touch again. Battleground had a chess element to it, but it was turn based, and it wasn't free flowing battle. You move someone to an area and they would shoot, and it was very much based on Cyberverse. I remember playing it, I remember finishing it, and there was just very little to unlock, very little to write home about. The level designs were probably the only thing that kept fresh about it, different settings, but there wasn't too much from one level to another. You were still doing the same objective in each level, which again can be said for the rest of this list. For that, I am going to put this down on... I might be a bit brutal here for the pit, I'm afraid. It's a shame because we don't get these games enough, and I want to kind of give them praise because, how do I always say this? You never know when the next one's coming, and it's just a shame when it does come and it's based off a TV show. I thought, oh, that's cool, and it just has the real shortest life. Is it there just to plump a TV show, just to plug it? I think so. I remember playing as Grimlock for the first time, thought, that's cool, and the novelty soon wore off. Back onto mobile games, Forged to Fight. I did like this. I did like Forged to Fight. It had one big problem as far as I'm concerned. It was a mobile game, and again, you had a lot of this time-passing element. The trouble I had with it was a game that tried to kind of throw every fandom together, and you had Beast Wars figures, and it was one-on-one fighting on a phone, which was awkward because you're tapping screens. It never feels as organic, dare I say, but you're fighting with all these characters from different continuities, and there was kind of a way of, when you were having the Autobots walking through the missions and kind of doing boss fights on each stages, yes, we're all fighting this big enemy now and it's corrupting our minds. I think it was the Quintessons, I can't quite remember. But then you start throwing in the live action movies, and you had G1 Optimus Prime versus 2007 Optimus Prime, and how they were kind of fighting with each other in the mind, like saying, no, you're wrong, oh no, you're wrong. And I thought, why am I fighting this Optimus? What's my story here? And I quickly worked out there wasn't one. It was just let's have a mash and let's use all of our abilities and let's have a fight and not really give any kind of story to it. Which again, you could say is at least it's not tied to anything and it gets a bit of free license, but it did just kind of feel a bit of a mash-up. And mobile games generally are more restricted as to what they can do on screen, and this was no exception. It's actually since been shut down. No real surprise. I'm going to put this under tier C. It's actually, I say it's been shut down, and it has. It's actually now a Netflix game, would you believe? I haven't actually played games through Netflix. I'm not sure how that works. Do you do it through a TV remote? That's going to be difficult. But it's still on there, should you want it. Final two then, we have Transformers Tactical Arena, another mobile game, and one that I did play for a bit. It's a fairly new game as well. There's a kind of a mini game on Final Fantasy if you're familiar, but it's kind of like wave defense mode, and you have to have time passing, but you've got your 3 towers that you must protect, and you can kind of draw, I don't know enough about it, but what, like Yu-Gi-Oh battle cards as to what you can play. So I remember you would have a value point come up, and you had 7 points, and you could use this particular card that was worth 7 points, and it was Long Haul. Long Haul was a big brute character who would walk very slowly on the battlefield, but obviously take a lot to stop him, and he would eventually get there and use drill arms to work on your turrets. And you could use all of these characters, and it was basically a game of chess. It was cool because you could use all manner of characters, but it's tower defense mode more or less. Again, there was no story to it. You were building up your portfolio as much as anything else, and all these type of cards you can unlock and all of the abilities you could use. I remember you could use Starscream coming in with a carpet bomb like tactic. It was fine, but as always with mobile games, they have a limited life. I must admit, I haven't played it since. So I'm going to put that under B. It was fine. It's again something new, something fresh, and not plugging a game, so it feels a bit more real. But yeah, it doesn't really get played too much nowadays. And the latest one, Transformers Earthspark Expedition. I played the demo of this, not the game, which was like a 30-minute game time demo. It seemed fine. You go around as a Bumblebee, and you are going through the story of the TV show, I suppose. But it's again against very much nameless Decepticon grunt, and I don't think you play as anyone else other than the Autobots. I don't think you play as anyone else other than Bumblebee, which to me feels a shame, considering the show is about Terrans, and I would much rather do like a split campaign with Twitch and Thrash and using their abilities than say Bumblebee. Now, whilst I like this Bumblebee, and when he turns into his alt mode, it's a cool alt mode, it actually goes around quite quick, it's fun to drive, but it's just a bit A to B platformer game, and I don't think anyone's too fussed about it. I will say though, it's a bit funny that they were willing to put out a game for this, yet they canned the TV series, allegedly, after 2 series. So, they were willing to put in a game that went out on PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo, but not enough to carry on with the TV series. So, is that money down the drain? It seemed fine, better than some others on the list, so I'm going to put that under B tier. And there we go, that's the list. It looks obviously more padded out because there's a lot of duplicates on there. There hasn't been that many games, and it's been a tale as old as time, and a lot of games that get cancelled. And this talks about a big Transformers Online, a big MMO. These are not small feats of engineering. I think if you were going to do something on Cybertron and you wanted to have every continuity and every back catalogue, and the fact that we get comics and new lore created all the time, things like that would be very, very hard to do. But think about it when it works. Think about 2003 Transformers, the Armada game. I don't know why that worked so well, but it did. It was using the concept of the TV show, so a story was there, but it was executed well. And then you go into War for Cybertron and Fall for Cybertron. Would it be such a crime if they went back now and finished it and closed off that story for what it was, or even redid it, re-released? There's been talk of putting them up again on stream and other streaming sites, but I don't know if it's ever been high on Hasbro's agenda, video games. I think we'd see a lot more, and I think they're much more likely to do license extensions, like we've seen with the Angry Birds, the crossovers using the likeness, than they are to produce a game themselves. And if the story is to be believed that the best seller for nostalgia, if you like, or toy collecting in general, is now adults rather than children, wouldn't you think video games follow? If you've got adults who buy PlayStations, Xbox and high-end gaming PCs, or even not kids as well to play it, I always feel it's untapped, and I always feel it's been left half done, and at times it's worked and at times it's not. But if you are watching Hasbro, please do throw out another game. Please finish off the War for Cybertron trilogy, and whatever game you bring out, please let us play as the Decepticons, just for the sake of a change. And there we go, that is my tier listing. I'm sure I've left some out, so do leave a note in the comments below which game you think you particularly enjoyed, which game you would like to have seen go on this list, and let's see what happens with Reactivate. I kind of did it in lieu of Reactivate not coming out, if we're led to believe that. But we'll see. When will the next game be? Are we going to get something to grace us? It might be a while. But thanks for watching. And as always, I will see you on the next one.